We're going to move to the NFC now. NFC 2v3, which is the Green Bay Packers, who are now 12-5 due to their win last week over Minnesota, traveling to Candlestick Park to take on the 11-4-1 San Francisco 49ers. The line in this game sits at San Francisco -3, so favored by 3 points at home. The over-under sits at a paltry 44.5. Other than that abhorrent tie with St. Louis earlier in the season, San Fran played very, very well at home this year. They were 6-1-1, outscoring opponents 198 to 111, which is an average of 25 points a game scored and only 14 points a game allowed. So the defense really, really stepped up here while they're playing at home. Green Bay on the road, basically the definition of average. Green Bay was 4-4 on the road this year, outscoring opponents 200 to 196, which is literally 25 to 25 is what it averages out as. So you can't get any more average than Green Bay was on the road this year. Head-to-head, San Francisco beat them week 1 of the season 30 to 22. Green Bay had won 8 straight matchups dating back to 1999 prior to that loss in the first week of the season. They played common opponents. Green Bay had 12 games against common opponents, including their playoff game. San Francisco had 11 games against common opponents. San Francisco in those games were 6-4-1 against common opponents, holding wins over Detroit, Seattle, 2 over Arizona, Chicago, and New Orleans. The 4 losses came against Minnesota, the New York Giants, Seattle, and St. Louis, and then, of course, the tie against St. Louis as well. In those games, they only outscored their opponents 220 to 201. In games with common opponents, Green Bay had a much better record. They were 9-3, holding 2 wins over Detroit, 2 wins over Minnesota, 2 wins over Chicago, and wins over Arizona, St. Louis, and New Orleans. Their 3 losses came to the same 3 of the same 4 teams that San Francisco had losses against. You're talking Minnesota, the New York Giants, and Seattle. However, they were able to outscore their opponents 287 to 240, so it is a better clip. Scoring on the year, there's edges for San Francisco, and there's one big edge for Green Bay. Overall in the season, very, very close. San Fran 23, Green Bay 22. If you take a look at home versus away, San Francisco home versus Green Bay away, the gap opens a little bit. San Fran's number is a little better at 25. Green Bay's is a little worse at 20. So that's a measurable gap there. But if you take a look at momentum, including Green Bay's playoff win here against Minnesota, it's a big gap. It's almost a full touchdown. You're talking Green Bay 28, San Francisco 21. San Francisco's offense has not looked good in their last 4 or 5 games, coupled with Green Bay's looking fantastic. Green Bay really gelled as a team here late in the season. Take a look at X Factors. We're talking Super Bowl MVP versus playoff rookie. This is, again, it's been made a huge deal of the fact that it's Colin Kaepernick's first ever playoff game, especially coupled with the fact that San Francisco is a team last year that was a couple of plays away from the Super Bowl with Alex Smith as their quarterback. So, and Alex Smith is still on the roster. So it's being made a big deal of, and probably for good cause. How is Colin Kaepernick going to react to looking across the field and seeing a guy not only has won a Super Bowl, but was the Super Bowl MVP. So it's the guy that has gotten it done better than anybody else on the biggest stage, the absolute single biggest stage in football. How is that going to affect Kaepernick's mind? Is it going to motivate him, or is it going to be like, oh my God, what can I do against this guy? It's a question that maybe some people might be quick to answer, but it's one that we can't answer until we actually see the teams on the field. X factor number 2. I have to ask, was Dwan Harris a fluke last week? I mentioned it in my review for the games. Dwan Harris had a great game. He had 100 all-purpose yards, touched the ball 22 times, and got into the end zone. Can Dwan Harris repeat that performance against San Francisco, or was it just a fluke? Was it just the fact that he came up against Minnesota, whose road defense is not as good as their home defense? And these are questions that need to be answered. If Dwan Harris can repeat those numbers against San Francisco, that adds an extra wrinkle there to the game plan that San Francisco is going to have to adjust to mid-game. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not that aspect of the game plays out, or whether Dwan Harris was in fact a fluke. My third and final X factor is the fact that Green Bay needs to step up to the big leagues. And what I mean by that is they only had 2 wins this year against teams that made the playoffs, and that was Houston and Minnesota. All their other wins on the year for a team that was 11-5 came against non-playoff teams. So Green Bay needs to ride the momentum from the win that they had in the wild card round and just really keep going here. Get back to Packer football, which is what they've been doing more lately. But still, they need that big win. The win that they had in the wild card weekend was against a team they already played twice this year. This is a team, these guys lost to them, first of all, in week 1. So Green Bay has so much to prove here, and they need to take that underdog mentality, I think, in order to get through and win this game. How do I think the game's going to go? On the over-under, I'm betting the over here just because I'm a sucker, and 44.5 is the number's too small. I just think the number's too small there. Their last 4 head-to-head have gone over. San Fran's been over in their last 4 straight and 7 of their last 10 overall. And I noticed the San Francisco defense really struggled against St. Louis when they came off their bye, which is essentially what San Fran is doing here as well. They're coming off of a bye week. And I found that their defense struggled in that game against St. Louis, and that was the game at home where they tied, I believe. In terms of a final score, I got to tell you, I'm with the Vegas suckers here. I like Green Bay in this game. I'm going to go Green Bay 24, San Francisco 23. I think it's going to be a last-second field goal by Mason Crosby to break the hearts of the 49ers. So 24-23 Green Bay. Obviously, I like the over. I like Green Bay straight up. On the line, we mentioned the line there, San Francisco -3. I say take Green Bay +3 on the line there. I like Green Bay straight up, so I'll take the points. Green Bay is 8-5 versus San Francisco, just 5-7 against the spread versus interconference teams. So I like the odds there. I like the number. Straight up, take Green Bay. On the line, take Green Bay +3. Over under, take over 44.5 points. And the last game on the docket, NFC 1 versus 5, is the Seattle Seahawks coming off their road victory over the Washington Redskins on Wild Card Weekend, who now sit at 12-5, coming into Atlanta to play the 13-3 top-seeded Atlanta Falcons. The line in this game is Atlanta -2.5. Over-under sits at 45.5 points. Atlanta at home this year, pretty much dominant. 7-1 at home, outscoring opponents 196-136. That is a clip of 25-17. Seattle on the road, as we mentioned last week, relatively pedestrian. They still, even with that win last week, have a losing record on the road of 4-5. 193-164 was the scoring. Head-to-head, they've had no recent matchups, but Atlanta has won 3 straight dating back to 2007. Now, again, it's not overly convincing when you have to go back to 2007 for the last 3 games, but still, I found it to be noteworthy. Games against common opponents. They've each played 6 games this year against common opponents. Atlanta was 5-1 in those games. They have wins over Carolina, Washington, Dallas, Arizona, and Detroit. Their one loss was late in the season to Carolina, and outscored their opponents in those games only 147-125. So it was relatively close games across the board. Seattle was 4-2 in those games. Wins over Carolina, Washington, Dallas, and Arizona. Losses to Arizona and Detroit. They outscored their opponents in those games 165-81. They were the beneficiary of one of those big numbers there in that the Arizona game that they won 58-0. So they were a real beneficiary in the numbers there. Overall scoring on the season, I see certain edges to Seattle. I see certain edges to Atlanta. Overall on the season, slight edge goes to Seattle, 23-21. Home versus away, it's a slight edge to Atlanta. It's 22-19 for the Falcons. Scoring over the last 5 is a big edge to Seattle, 28-18. And again, you have those big, like 40 and 50 point games in there that really bulk up Seattle's scoring. I don't know if those games were not necessarily flukes, because Seattle's a damn good team, but if they were just sort of outliers on the scatter plot, you know what I mean? Yeah, math joke. You never thought you'd see a math joke in a football video from me. X factors in this game. I have very little trust for the Seahawks on the road. I'll come right out and say it. I'm not overly confident in them on the road. Last week, by hook or by crook, and whether you like it or not, they beat a Washington team with a one-legged rushing quarterback. At 8 minutes, with 8 minutes left in that game, Seattle was losing that game 14-13. And in the 3-minute span where you had Marshawn Lynch punch in a touchdown and then RG3 get injured and then get another field goal, in a 3-minute span it became 24-14. That score was very flattering to Seattle because it was a much closer game than 10 points would dictate. How much is losing Chris Clemons going to hurt Seattle's pass rush? Chris Clemons is their top pass rusher, one of the top pass rushers in the league. He is gone with, I believe, a torn ACL. Atlanta only gave up 28 sacks on the year, but they gave up 5 QB hits a game. If Seattle loses their top pass rusher, is Matt Ryan going to be given all day here to sort of sit in the pocket and go to town on Seattle's secondary? Seattle has a very good secondary. All the props in the world to Seattle secondary. It's damn good. It's one of the top units in the league. But if you give Matt Ryan, Roddy White, Julio Jones, Tony Gonzalez, if you are sending all of them on the majority of plays, because again, Atlanta's not exactly a rush-first team, it's going to wear this secondary down. It can't not. It's too many weapons being sent at one time. And that's really my third X factor here. It's Seattle's defensive backs face a 3-pronged pass attack and Jaquise Rogers. And I only mention Jaquise Rogers because he is Atlanta's scat back threat. And I always like to make mention if a team has a good scat back, because a good scat back can be a difference maker. I expect actually to see a lot of Jaquise Rogers in this game in short yardage, like short yardage runs, just short yardage pass plays. When they only might need 3 or 4 yards, I really expect to see a lot of Jaquise Rogers in this game. And if Jaquise Rogers can be successful in the short yardage game, Seattle's going to have a hard time stopping Atlanta. They really, really are. How do I think the game's going to go? On the number 45.5, I'm actually going to say under. It's a small number, I understand that, but only 14 of these teams' 33 combined games this year, including the playoff game, went over 45.5. It took a little number crunching to come up with that, but only 14 of 33, so less than half, went over 45.5. Seattle's had 2 straight unders. Atlanta's had 3 straight unders. I actually like the under in this game. Maybe. A little bit. Straight up in this game, you know, again, like I say, it's my fundamental mistrust of Seattle playing anywhere but Seattle. I have to take a good home team playing at home. So I have to take Atlanta in this game. I'm going to take Atlanta 24, Seattle 20. So again, on the over-under, I like it to go under. That line of Atlanta minus 2.5, I will take Atlanta minus 2.5. Atlanta's too good at home. I will say, this goes against multiple trends for Seattle. Against the spread, Seattle has been very, very good lately. So this is, if you're going to bet this, you need to full well understand that this is going against Seattle's trends. With a number this small, I just like Atlanta straight up, so I think 2.5 points is very coverable for Atlanta. Some spreads even have it Atlanta minus 1. So I just think if you're going to bet Atlanta to win the game straight out, then you should also take them on the line here. So I'll take Atlanta minus 2.5 on the line. So once again, I like Atlanta straight up, Atlanta minus 2.5, and the game to go under 45.5 points. That's it for me, kids. Thank you for bearing with me while I'm kind of sleepy and might be developing a cough or cold thing here or whatever. That is the playoff predictions, and we're just going to go over them here with you one more time. AFC 2 versus 3, Houston at New England. Straight up, I like New England. On the line, I like New England minus 9.5, and the over-under, I like over 47.5 points. AFC 1v4, Baltimore at Denver. Straight up, I like the Broncos. On the line, I like Denver minus 9.5. And the over-under, I like over 46 points. NFC 2 versus 3, Green Bay traveling to San Francisco. Straight up, I like the Packers on the road. For the line, I like Green Bay +3. And the over-under, I like over 44.5 points. And NFC 1v5, Seattle traveling to Atlanta. Straight up, I like the Falcons. On the line, I like Atlanta -2.5. And the over-under, I like it to go under 45.5 points. That's it for me. That's my division round video. We'll be back, of course, again for the conference championships. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. And hey, it's better late than never, right?